The city was alive that afternoon. Streetlights were still off, but the glow of sunset bounced off glass buildings, mixing gold and orange across the square. People moved in every direction, but near the fountain in the center a crowd had gathered. They weren't there for politics or protests. They were there for music. A famous musician was about to perform. He wasn't just anyone. He was the kind of artist who traveled by private jet, lived in a mansion overlooking the ocean, and had walls full of awards. Reporters called him the Golden Trumpet. Every note he played sounded like it was touched by perfection. His suits were always sharp, his shoes shining, and he had a confidence that made people believe he could never lose. He stepped onto the small outdoor stage built for the charity event, smiling as if the city itself belonged to him. Cameras flashed, children waved, and the crowd cheered. He lifted his golden trumpet, and when the first note hit the air, everything around seemed to freeze. His sound was powerful, smooth, and bright, like sunlight caught in music form. Every run, every pause was exact. People clapped wildly when he finished the first piece. He looked pleased, not surprised. This was his normal, being admired, being perfect. Then, while he prepared for the next tune, his eyes caught something strange near the edge of the crowd. A young woman stood quietly holding an old trumpet case. It looked worn out, covered in scratches and faded stickers. She wasn't dressed like the others. No shiny dress, no expensive shoes. Just simple jeans, a plain shirt, and tired shoes. At first, he thought she was just another fan. But when he saw her whispering softly as if rehearsing, curiosity got the better of him. He gestured toward her with a half-smile. "You," he said through the microphone, his voice echoing through the speakers. "You look like you play too. Why don't you join me?" The crowd turned to look at her. She blinked, startled, then shook her head. But people around her started cheering, encouraging her to go up. Some even clapped and shouted, "Let her play." The famous musician grinned, enjoying the energy. He didn't mean harm, but there was a trace of teasing in his tone when he said, "Come on, don't be shy. Let's see what that old trumpet can do." The girl hesitated for a few seconds. Then she slowly stepped forward, her fingers gripping the worn handle of her case. The crowd made way for her. Every step she took sounded heavier than it should have. When she reached the stage, she gave a small nod and climbed up. Up close, she looked nervous but not scared. Her eyes were calm, focused. She didn't say a word. She simply opened the case, revealing an instrument that had seen better days. The brass was dull, the mouthpiece had scratches, and one of the valves looked slightly bent. The musician looked at it, then back at her. "You sure it still works?" He joked lightly. She smiled faintly. "It does," she said. That was all. He laughed softly and turned to the audience. "All right, everyone. Let's make this fun. A little trumpet duel. I'll start and our guest will follow. Let's see who makes the better music." The crowd cheered again. It felt like entertainment to them, an unexpected twist in a smooth show. The musician raised his trumpet and began to play. His tune was sharp, clean, and full of tricks. Fast runs, high notes, the kind of things that made people gasp. He moved with ease, his rhythm perfect. When he finished, applause burst out once more. He looked at the girl, nodding toward her. "Your turn," he said with confidence. She took a deep breath and lifted her trumpet. Her fingers rested lightly on the valves. The moment she played the first note, something shifted. The sound wasn't loud or showy. It was soft, almost fragile, but it carried emotion. It felt like warmth spreading through cold air. Her tune was simple, a slow melody that told a story without words. You could almost feel what she was feeling, something between sadness and peace. The notes weren't perfect, but they were alive. The crowd, which had been noisy and playful just moments ago, went silent. Even the children stopped talking. She closed her eyes while playing, and for a moment it didn't seem like she was performing. It seemed like she was remembering something or someone. Every note felt personal, as if she was talking to the wind. When she finished, the silence lasted for a heartbeat before the applause came. But it wasn't the loud, excited kind. It was warm, slow, and honest. People looked at each other with soft smiles. The famous musician stood still, his golden trumpet hanging by his side. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't angry, just thoughtful. He had never heard something like that. It wasn't skill that moved the crowd, it was soul. He stepped forward, trying to recover his charm. "That was nice," he said. The crowd laughed lightly, sensing his awkwardness. "You've got some talent. What's your name?" She looked down, then met his eyes. "It doesn't matter," she replied quietly. "It's just music." She closed her case and began to step off the stage, but people started chanting for more. "One more song." "Together," someone shouted. The musician hesitated. He had never shared a stage with anyone who wasn't a celebrity or a professional, but something about her calmness intrigued him. He nodded. "All right," he said, turning toward her. "Let's play together." She paused, looked at him for a moment, and nodded. They chose a familiar tune, one every musician knew. But when they started, something unexpected happened. Their sounds blended beautifully. His trumpet had power. Hers had feeling. His was gold and bright. Hers was soft and deep. The contrast created harmony. By the time the song ended, the crowd was on its feet. Even people walking by stopped to listen. Cameras flashed again, but this time the focus wasn't only on the famous musician. The simple girl with the old trumpet had stolen part of the spotlight. He turned toward her, slightly out of breath. "You play from your heart," he said, his voice quieter now. "Not many do that anymore." She smiled politely. "That's the only way I know." He wanted to ask more, where she learned, who taught her, but before he could, she was already stepping down from the stage. She didn't stay for pictures or applause. She just disappeared into the crowd. That night, when the musician went back to his hotel suite overlooking the city lights, he couldn't sleep. His phone buzzed nonstop, messages from reporters, clips from the performance going viral online, people tagging him and the mysterious girl. But even with all the noise, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she played. He played back the video of their duet. Her tone wasn't perfect by professional standards, but it had something he couldn't name, something real. He realized that for the first time in years he had felt nervous while playing. Not because of competition, but because her music reminded him of a time before fame, when he used to play in subway tunnels just for the love of sound. Meanwhile, across the city, the girl walked home with her trumpet case in her hands. The crowd's cheers still echoed in her mind, but she didn't think much of them. She wasn't after fame. She just loved to play. In her small apartment, she placed the trumpet on the table and looked at an old picture beside it. A photograph of a man holding the same trumpet, smiling. "Did you hear, Dad?" She whispered softly. I played again. The room was quiet, but her heart felt lighter. For her, the day wasn't about being challenged or winning a duel. It was about remembering why she started playing in the first place. Back in his luxury suite, the musician poured himself a glass of water and looked out the window. The city lights below seemed endless, but somehow they felt distant. He had everything, money, fame, respect, but something in that girl's simple melody had stirred a part of him that success had buried long ago. He promised himself that he would find her again, not to compete, but to understand. He didn't know her name, but he remembered the look in her eyes when she said, "It's just music." The next morning, newspapers and social media were filled with headlines about the trumpet duel that stunned the city. Clips of the girl's heartfelt performance spread everywhere. Some called her the mystery trumpeter. Others said she beat the millionaire with emotion, but she didn't read any of it. She had work in the morning, a job at a small cafe where she served coffee and occasionally played for customers when it was quiet. To her, life went on as usual. Yet somewhere deep down, she knew that moment on stage had changed something. Not just for her, but for him too. She didn't know that he had already begun asking around, calling organizers, trying to find out who she was, and though she had no idea, the real story was only beginning. The next morning, the city woke up to a new story. News outlets were talking about the trumpet duel that had surprised everyone. Videos flooded the internet. Clips showed the millionaire musician standing beside a simple girl with an old trumpet. One video had millions of views within hours. People called it the day passion beat perfection. In his high-rise apartment, the musician sat at his breakfast table, staring at his phone. Every time he opened social media, he saw that same clip. Her soft melody kept replaying in his mind. He had played countless shows, stood on stages across the world, but no one had ever left him feeling like that. His assistant entered the room, talking about interviews and meetings, but he barely heard a word. He was thinking about her, the mystery girl who played from the heart. "Find out who she is," he finally said, interrupting his assistant mid-sentence. "Who?" "The girl from yesterday. The one with the old trumpet." The assistant blinked, surprised. "You want to find her?" Yes, the musician replied simply. I need to talk to her. He didn't say why. He didn't even understand it himself. But something about her sound had stirred something deep inside, a quiet feeling he hadn't known in years. Meanwhile, across town, the girl's day began like any other. She worked the morning shift at a small cafe near the train station. The bell above the door kept ringing as people came and went. She smiled at regulars, made coffee, and wiped down tables. Her trumpet case sat in the corner just like always. Some of her coworkers had seen the viral video. They teased her, laughing kindly. You're famous now. Shouldn't you be on TV instead of making coffee? She only smiled and shook her head. That's not fame. It's just music. When the cafe got quiet in the afternoon, she took out her trumpet and played softly for the few customers sitting near the window. It was her way to unwind. The sound of her notes floated above the smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee. Some customers paused, listening, smiling without knowing why. That same afternoon, the musician drove through the city in a black car. He had canceled a recording session just to visit the charity organizers from the event. He wanted to know more about her. She didn't give us her name, one organizer said. She just signed up as a volunteer. Quiet girl, barely talked to anyone. Played beautifully, though. You really want to find her? Yes, he said. I owe her another performance. But deep down it wasn't about owing her. It was about understanding her. For the next few days, the search became a quiet mission. His assistant checked online forums, social media groups, and charity rosters. But the girl didn't post anything, didn't have public accounts, and seemed to live outside the noise of fame. That made him even more curious. Then one evening, while scrolling through videos online, he found something unexpected. A short clip of a cafe worker playing trumpet near a window. The tune was the same simple melody she had played at the duel. The caption read, "Girl from local cafe plays like an angel." He paused the video, recognizing her immediately. The next morning he visited the cafe. He wore casual clothes, a plain hoodie, and sunglasses. He didn't want attention, just a conversation. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. The smell of freshly ground coffee greeted him. She was behind the counter taking an order, her trumpet case sitting quietly nearby. When she saw him, her eyes widened slightly. You, she said softly. He smiled awkwardly. I hope I'm not interrupting your shift. She shook her head slowly, unsure what to say. He had come in person. The same man who lived on magazine covers and billboards was now standing in her small cafe, looking almost nervous. I saw the video, he said. You play here often? Sometimes, she said. When it's not busy, he nodded. You sound different when you play. It's not just notes, it's like you're telling a story. She looked down, brushing a strand of hair away. That's how my father taught me. He said music should feel like speaking without words. Her words stayed with him. Would you play with me again? He asked quietly. She looked surprised. Play with you like another duel? No, he said quickly. Not a duel. A real performance, together, she hesitated. I don't know. I'm not a professional. That's exactly why I want to, he said. People heard something in your music that they don't hear anymore. Maybe it's time they do. The cafe owner waved from behind the counter, signaling that she could take a break. She thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, she said softly. But just one time, he smiled. One time is enough. They met again the next day in his studio. It was a place filled with expensive instruments, recording equipment, and city views that stretched for miles. She looked around quietly, running her fingers across the smooth piano keys as if afraid to touch anything. Noticed her eyes lingering on a large photo on the wall. Him standing, on stage with a crowd of thousands cheering. You really live up. There? She said, half smiling. So far from where I do. He looked around his studio, realizing for the first time how empty it felt despite its beauty. It doesn't feel high when you forget what music means, he replied softly. They began to rehearse. At first she seemed shy, almost apologetic with every note. He guided her gently, showing her small technical things. But as the session went on, something changed. Her confidence grew, and soon she was leading the melody. He watched her, amazed. Her old trumpet didn't sound weak here, it sounded human. After an hour, they stopped. The room was silent except for the faint city hum outside. That was something, he said. I haven't felt that in years. She smiled slightly. Because you stopped trying to impress. He laughed quietly. You're right. I forgot what it feels like to just play. Over the next week, they met again and again, rehearsing for what he called a friendly concert. It wasn't about showing off or breaking records. He wanted people to hear real music again, something that came from the heart. As they practiced, he began to notice small things about her life. She always packed her lunch instead of buying food. She took the bus everywhere. She never complained about anything. Every time she played, she closed her eyes like she was somewhere far away. One day, during a break, he asked, "Who taught you to play like that?" "My father," she said quietly. "He was a street musician. We used to play near the train station. He couldn't afford lessons, so we learned together. When he passed away, I stopped for a long time. Yesterday was the first time I played on stage since then." He didn't know what to say. For a man surrounded by fame and applause, her simplicity was overwhelming. He realized that she carried a kind of peace he had lost long ago. When the day of the concert came, the city was buzzing again. This time, it wasn't about a duel, it was about a duet. Posters showed both of them side by side, the millionaire musician and the mystery girl. She stood backstage holding her trumpet tightly. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "I don't belong on stages like this." He smiled reassuringly. "Yes, you do. This time we play for the people, not the cameras." When they stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted. Bright lights shone down, but she didn't seem nervous anymore. As they started to play, everything else faded away. The first part of the song belonged to him. Clean, strong, filled with control. Then came her part, soft, emotional, flowing. When their sounds joined, the crowd could feel it. Every note carried something real, something pure. As the last note hung in the air, the audience rose to their feet. There were no words, just applause, loud, long, full of warmth. He turned to her, his eyes shining. "You did it," she smiled, shaking her head. "We did it." Reporters rushed to the stage, asking questions, taking photos, shouting over each other. But the girl didn't stay. She slipped quietly off stage, just like before. She didn't crave attention. She just wanted to play. Later that night, the musician sat in his dressing room, listening to a recording of their performance. He closed his eyes and smiled to himself. For the first time in years, he felt proud, not because of fame, but because the music felt alive again. Somewhere across town in her small apartment, she placed her trumpet beside her window and looked out at the stars. She didn't know that her music had just changed someone's life forever, and neither of them knew yet. This was only the beginning of what would soon flip both their worlds completely upside down. The night after their concert felt like magic. The city lights shimmered brighter, and for once the famous musician didn't rush off to parties or interviews. He stayed behind in the empty hall, sitting alone on the edge of the stage. The echoes of the performance still lingered in the air. He looked out at the rows of empty seats, remembering how it felt to play beside her. It wasn't like performing with professionals who chased perfection. It was different, raw, real, and honest. When she played, it felt as if time slowed down, as if every note carried something deeper than music. The next morning, headlines appeared everywhere. "Millionaire musician and mystery girl mesmerize city. A performance that brought tears. Who is she?" People were curious. They wanted to know her name, her story, everything. Reporters camped outside his studio, asking questions he didn't want to answer. He didn't want to turn her life into a headline. She wasn't chasing fame. He knew that. When his assistant mentioned that she hadn't answered any interview requests, he smiled. "Good," he said softly. "Let her be." But deep down, he hoped she would come back. Across town, she was back at the cafe, cleaning tables like nothing had changed. Her phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers, but she ignored them. She didn't want cameras or attention. She only wanted to play. Her coworker turned on the TV in the background. A talk show was playing the concert clip. The host said, "People are calling this the most emotional trumpet performance in years. The mystery girl has captured hearts everywhere." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "The world moves fast," she said softly. "Tomorrow they'll forget." But she was wrong. The world didn't forget. The video spread across continents. Musicians, teachers, and even school bands were inspired by it. Something about that duet reminded people what music used to be about. Feeling. A few days later, she got a call. It wasn't from a reporter. It was him. "I know you don't like the spotlight," he said, "but I wanted to ask if you'd join me for something different. A charity show. Not for fame. For kids who want to learn music." She hesitated. I don't know, she said. I'm not used to big crowds. There'll be no cameras, he promised. Just children. We'll play for them. That changed everything. All right, she said. I'll come. The event took place in a small community center. Dozens of children filled the hall, sitting on the floor with wide eyes and restless hands. Some held toy instruments, others just clapped. There were no reporters, no glittering lights, just music waiting to happen. When she and the musician stepped onto the stage, the kids cheered loudly. One little boy whispered to his friend, "That's the lady from the video." She laughed quietly. "Ready?" the musician asked. She nodded. The moment they started playing, the room filled with warmth. The sound wasn't perfect, it was joyful. Children clapped off beat. A few sang along even though they didn't know the words. The girls' hearts swelled watching their smiles. After the show, the children crowded around them asking questions. "How do you make it sound like that?" one girl asked her. "Close your eyes," she said, smiling, "and play what you feel." The musician watched her gently explain things to the children. Something about her patience, her kindness, it was rare. He had played for presidents and kings, but this moment, surrounded by laughing kids, felt more meaningful than any award he had ever received. Later, as they packed up their instruments, he said quietly, "You belong here more than anywhere else." She smiled. "This is what music is for, making people feel something." He looked at her for a moment before saying, "You make me feel like I've been doing it wrong all these years." She laughed softly. "You haven't been wrong, just maybe too busy to listen." That night he couldn't stop thinking about her words. For years he'd been chasing perfection. Albums, sold-out tours, shiny trophies, but none of it made him feel what that one small performance did. Over the following weeks, they continued to play together at small events, parks, hospitals, orphanages, places where music meant something real. Crowds loved them not because they were famous, but because they were honest. Every time they played, their connection grew stronger. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. Their trumpet spoke for them. One evening, after a performance at a children's hospital, they sat outside on a bench. The air was cool and the sound of distant traffic mixed with the quiet hum of the city. He asked gently, "Why do you avoid the stage? You could have everything, fame, comfort, success." She looked up at the night sky. "Because I already had everything once. My father was sick, but when we played together, it felt like we owned the world. When he died, I realized that music isn't about the crowd. It's about connection." He nodded slowly. "You're right. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." A silence followed. Not awkward, just thoughtful. The next morning, his manager called, frustrated. "You've turned down every big concert this month. People are asking questions. What are you doing?" He replied calmly, "Making music that matters." His manager sighed. "That girl has changed you." He smiled faintly. Maybe that's not a bad thing, but as time went on, not everyone liked his new path. Sponsors complained. Big brands backed away. "People want luxury," one of them said. Not charity work, he didn't care. For the first time, he felt free. Then one day, out of nowhere, she didn't show up to practice. He waited, thinking maybe she was late. Hours passed. No call, no message. He tried reaching her, but her phone was off. A strange worry filled his chest. The next day, he went to the cafe. The owner looked up sadly when he asked for her. "She's gone," the man said. "Gone? She had to move out suddenly. Said something about rent going up. She didn't leave a number." He walked out feeling an ache he hadn't expected. For days he couldn't focus. The sound of her trumpet haunted him. The duet that had once brought him peace now felt incomplete. Weeks passed and her absence turned into silence. Fans noticed too. "Where's the mystery girl?" They asked online. He didn't know what to tell them. One rainy evening, he sat by the window of his studio, watching water streak down the glass. The city outside was blurred and distant. He picked up his trumpet and tried to play the melody she had written, but it didn't sound the same. It needed her. Just then, his assistant walked in with a small brown envelope. "This came in the mail," he said. "No return address." He opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note and a single photo of children holding trumpets. The note said, "I started teaching. They remind me why music matters. Thank you for showing me that the world still listens. Keep playing, not to win, but to feel." He stared at the letter for a long time, his throat tightening. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply gone where she was needed most. A few days later, he made an announcement on social media. "Next month," he wrote, "there will be a public music event, free for everyone. Bring your instruments. Let's play together for those who can't afford lessons." When people arrived on the day of the event, hundreds of kids filled the park, carrying trumpets, guitars, violins, whatever they had. And though she wasn't there, her spirit filled the air. The musician stood on stage, lifted his trumpet, and began to play her melody. Slowly the crowd joined in. Dozens of trumpets echoed his tune. Some notes were off, some too sharp, but none of that mattered. It was music from the heart. As the song reached its final note, he looked up at the sky and smiled. Somewhere out there, he knew she was playing too. Maybe in a small classroom, maybe in another park. But he could almost hear her sound blending with his. That night, as he packed his instrument, he whispered quietly to himself. She was right. Music isn't a battle, it's a voice. And though they were now miles apart, their music carried the same message. One that would soon bring them together again in a way neither of them could have imagined. Months passed since the music event in the park. The video of that day spread everywhere, showing hundreds of children playing together under the open sky. The millionaire musician had kept his promise. Music was no longer locked in golden halls. It was alive again, free for everyone. But even as the world praised him, a quiet ache remained in his heart. He still thought about her, the simple girl who had changed everything. Her melody still played in his head when the nights were quiet. He had tried to find her again, but she seemed to have disappeared completely. The cafe had been rented to someone new, and no one knew where she had gone. He wondered if she ever saw what her influence had started. One evening, while looking through the photo from the envelope she'd sent, he noticed something small in the background, a building sign. It was blurry, but he could read the words, Community Arts Center. He searched for it online and found it, a small place on the edge of the city. The next day, without telling anyone, he drove there himself. The building was simple. Its paint faded, but laughter and music spilled from inside. Through the open windows, he could hear trumpets, violins, and flutes, some off-key, some shaky, but all full of life. He stepped inside quietly. A group of children sat in a semicircle, instruments in their hands. And there she was, standing in front of them, smiling as she guided them through the notes. Her trumpet rested under her arm. When she saw him, her eyes widened. The children turned to look too. "Everyone," she said softly, "keep practicing. I'll be right back." She walked over, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You found me," she said, half smiling. "I had help," he replied, holding up the photo. "You left a clue," she laughed quietly. "I didn't mean to, but I'm glad you came." He looked around the room. "You did all this?" "With a few friends," she said. "We rent this space and teach kids from the neighborhood. Most of them can't afford lessons, but they have talent. They just need someone to believe in them." He looked at the old instruments, the cracked chairs, and the peeling paint, but all he could see was joy. The children played with excitement, not worrying about mistakes. It reminded him of himself, long before fame changed everything. "You've built something beautiful," he said. "It's not perfect," she replied, "but it's real." He nodded slowly. "Can I help?" She raised an eyebrow. "You already helped. The event you held gave us donations. We bought most of these instruments with that money." He looked surprised. "I didn't even know," she smiled. "You didn't have to. Music has its own way of finding where it's needed." He watched the children again. Their small hands trembled as they played, but their faces glowed with pride. "They're lucky to have you," he said. "They teach me as much as I teach them," she replied softly. "They remind me that music doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone." He stayed for the rest of the class, helping the kids with small notes, clapping for them after each tune. When the session ended, the children ran off laughing, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet room. "You've changed," she said, looking at him. "You're calmer," he smiled faintly. "You changed me. Before I met you, I was chasing applause. Now I'm chasing meaning." She nodded, her eyes soft. "That's the best kind of chase." He looked at the walls. There were drawings, paper decorations, and a big piece of cardboard with the words, "Music for Everyone," written in colorful letters. He read it slowly, then turned to her. You've created something that matters more than any concert I've ever played." She looked away shyly. "It's still small. But one day, maybe it'll grow." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Let me help you make that happen." She looked surprised. "You mean—" "I'll fund it," he said simply. "New instruments, a proper building, teachers. Whatever you need." She frowned slightly. "That's kind, but I can't take your money." "It's not about money," he said. "It's about giving back what you gave me." She hesitated. "You don't owe me anything," he smiled. "Maybe not. But I owe music something. And this," he gestured around, "this is music." For a long moment she was silent. Then she nodded slowly. "All right. But if we do this, it's a partnership. You're not my sponsor. You're my teammate," he laughed softly. "Deal." Over the next few months, they worked together to transform the small center. The walls were repainted, new instruments arrived, and volunteers joined to teach. The news spread quickly. Soon children from all parts of the city started coming. They named it the Open Note Foundation. Every afternoon, the musician came after his professional sessions to teach trumpet. The children adored him, not because of his fame, but because he listened to them just like she did. He and the girl became close. They spent long evenings planning lessons, sharing stories, and sometimes just playing together for the sheer joy of it. There was no audience, no cameras, just two people and their music. One evening, after a long day, they sat outside the building watching the sunset. The sound of children laughing echoed from the playground nearby. He said quietly, "You know, I used to think being rich meant having everything. But now I feel wealthier than I ever did." She smiled gently. "Because now you're giving something that lasts." He nodded. "And you made me remember what I'd forgotten." They sat there in silence, the light fading into a soft orange glow. As months passed, the foundation grew. Newspapers wrote about it, but this time, he made sure the headlines focused on the children, not him. People donated instruments and money inspired by their story. Still, not everything was easy. Some investors from his old world started pulling away. "You're wasting your time," one of them said. "There's no profit in this," he only smiled. "Not everything valuable has a price tag." One evening, after the last class ended, he found her sitting alone in the music room. The lights were dim and she was playing her father's trumpet softly. He listened quietly until she finished. "That song again," he said gently. "The one you played at the first duel." She smiled sadly. "It's his song. I still play it whenever I miss him." He walked closer. "He'd be proud. You're keeping his music alive through these children." Her eyes shimmered. "I hope so." He used to say, "As long as someone hears your song, you never really leave." He nodded, looking at her with warmth. "Then he's still here." She looked at him, smiling faintly. "And so is the music we made together." He chuckled softly. "It's funny how it all started with a duel." She laughed too. "And now look at us, teaching instead of competing." He picked up his trumpet and said, "How about one last tune before we close for the night?" She nodded. They stood facing each other and their melodies intertwined again, soft, calm, and full of memories. It wasn't a performance, it was a conversation. As the final note faded, the room felt lighter, peaceful. She looked at him quietly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" He asked. "For listening." "For believing," he smiled gently. "You did the same for me." The next morning, she found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a small key and a note that said, "For your new music room." "It's ready." She rushed outside, following the address written below. When she reached the new building, tears filled her eyes. It wasn't huge, but it was beautiful. Bright walls, big windows, shelves filled with instruments. The sign above the door read, "Harmony Hall, a gift of sound." He stood near the entrance, smiling quietly as she approached. "You did this," she whispered. "We did this," he said. Together. She looked around the room, children already running inside with excitement, picking up instruments, filling the air with laughter and sound. For the first time, she felt her dream had truly come alive. That night, when the city was quiet, they stood on the balcony of the new hall, looking out at the stars. She said softly, "It's strange. You had everything, but you found peace in something small." He looked at her with a gentle smile. "And you had nothing, but you gave me everything that matters." The wind carried their words away, but the bond between them stayed. They didn't need fame or fortune anymore. They had something more powerful, music that healed, connected, and changed lives. Neither of them knew that this harmony they had built together would soon face its biggest test yet. Because sometimes even the strongest melody can be shaken by silence. The new music hall had become a small miracle in the city. Every day the place filled with laughter, chatter, and the sounds of instruments tuning up. Children who once wandered the streets now rushed to lessons, excited to learn. The millionaire musician and the simple girl had built something real, something that wasn't just about notes or fame but about second chances. Months passed in peace. The two of them worked side by side, teaching, organizing concerts, and guiding children who dreamed of music. Their days were busy but full of joy. They often stayed late after classes, sharing tea and talking about how life had changed. But one evening, things began to shift. A large music company reached out to the musician, offering him a huge opportunity, a world tour across major cities. It was the kind of offer most artists would dream of. They promised millions, global recognition, and the biggest stages imaginable. When he received the offer, he sat quietly for a long time. He thought about what it meant. A part of him felt excited, but another part felt uneasy. He knew what that world was like: bright lights, endless applause, and lonely hotel rooms. That night, he went to the music hall where she was still working with a group of kids. He waited until the class ended, then showed her the letter. She read it carefully, then looked up. "That's a huge offer," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I don't know if I should take it." She placed the paper on the table. "It's your dream. You should go if your heart tells you to." He looked at her, his voice low. "My dream changed. I used to think music was about being seen, but now it's about connection." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you can take that connection to the world. Let people see what music really means." He stayed silent for a moment, then said, "What if everything we built here falls apart while I'm gone?" She shook her head. "It won't. This place doesn't depend on one person anymore. It belongs to everyone now." He nodded slowly. "Would you be all right running it without me for a while?" Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes softened. "I'll manage. The kids need someone here. You go remind the world what real music sounds like." It was a hard choice, but after many sleepless nights, he agreed to go. The day he left, the children gathered around him, giving him a small handmade card that said, "Play for us too." He promised he would. As the plane lifted off, he looked down at the city lights and felt a mix of pride and sadness. He wasn't just leaving a place. He was leaving a part of his soul behind. The tour began, and as expected, it was a massive success. Crowds cheered, newspapers praised him, and the world remembered why he was considered one of the best. But something felt missing. Each night after the show, he sat alone in his hotel room, listening to recordings from the music hall. The laughter of the children, the sound of her trumpet guiding them, it was all still in his heart. Months passed and he completed the tour. But the fame, the applause, even the wealth didn't bring the same warmth he felt back in that small, noisy hall filled with kids who believed in dreams. One morning, he packed up his things, canceled the final shows, and took the first flight home. When he arrived at the hall, the place was alive with music again. Children were practicing a new piece together. She stood at the front, smiling proudly as they played. When she saw him, her face lit up. "You're back early," she said. "I missed home," he said simply. She laughed softly. "You called this place home?" He looked around. "It's the only place that feels like it." The children ran to greet him, excited to show what they had learned. They played a short melody they'd written themselves. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of energy. When they finished, he clapped, eyes shining. "That was incredible. You've all grown so much." She watched him, her smile calm but knowing. "You've grown too," she said quietly. He nodded. "You were right. Fame doesn't fill your heart, music does, and the real kind lives right here." The next few weeks were peaceful again. They worked side by side, rebuilding their rhythm. Together, they started planning a big concert for the community. It would feature the children and celebrate how far they'd come. On the night of the concert, the hall overflowed. Families, neighbors, and even strangers gathered to watch. The stage lights glowed warmly as the children stepped up, their instruments shining. The girl stood in front of them with her trumpet, and the musician stood beside her. Before the music began, he spoke to the crowd. "Once I thought being the best was the only thing that mattered," he said. "But I learned that the most beautiful music isn't played on the biggest stage. It's played when hearts connect. Tonight you'll hear that kind of music. The crowd clapped softly and then the children began to play. Their song told a story of struggle, hope, and unity. Every note filled the air with emotion. When the final note faded, the audience rose in applause. Some people even had tears in their eyes. The musician looked at the girl beside him and smiled. "You did this," he said. "No," she replied gently. "We did this." As they bowed together, the flash of cameras lit the hall, but neither of them cared. This time it wasn't about being seen, it was about being felt. Later that night, after everyone had left, the two of them stayed behind, cleaning up the stage. The chairs were empty now, but the sound of laughter still seemed to hang in the air. He sat down on the edge of the stage. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. She sat beside him. "Every day. And I still can't believe how it all began with a silly trumpet challenge." He chuckled softly. "That challenge was the best mistake I ever made." She looked at him amused. "You mean the one where you lost?" He grinned. "Yes, the one where I finally learned what winning really means." They sat in silence for a while, watching the moonlight spill through the windows. Then he said quietly, "You know, I've been thinking about what's next. I want to start more music halls like this in other towns, maybe even other countries. But I don't want to do it alone." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You don't have to," he smiled. "So you'll help me?" She nodded. "As long as it's for the music, always." And so they began again. Over the next few years, their foundation grew far beyond what they'd imagined. They opened small centers in different cities, each one filled with children eager to learn. The story of the millionaire musician and the simple girl spread across the world, not as a tale of fame or fortune, but as a reminder that kindness and passion can rewrite lives. Everywhere they went, they carried their trumpets. They didn't need fancy introductions anymore. People recognized them by the sound, the same pure, heartfelt tone that had first brought them together. One day, during a quiet afternoon rehearsal, a little boy asked the musician, "Sir, how did you become so good?" The musician smiled. "Because someone once showed me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real." The boy nodded seriously, then went back to practicing. The musician glanced at the girl, who was smiling from across the room. Later, as the day ended, they stood outside watching the children run home. He turned to her and said softly, "You know, everything flipped after that day." She looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" He smiled gently. "I challenged you thinking I was teaching a lesson, but it was me who got taught. You showed me the real power of music and of humility." She looked at him for a moment, then said, "Sometimes life has to flip to fall into place." He nodded. "And I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun set, they played one last duet together. The melody floated through the evening air, blending with the sound of laughter and distant traffic. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was honest and full of heart. When they finished, she lowered her trumpet and smiled. "That's what music is supposed to feel like," she said. He looked at her, eyes soft with gratitude. "And that's what life should feel like, too." The camera of time slowly panned away from the two of them, standing together outside the hall that had changed so many lives. Their story wasn't about fame, money, or rivalry anymore. It was about finding truth in simplicity, joy in giving, and meaning in connection. And though the world remembered him as the millionaire musician, those who truly knew the story remembered something else. That once, a simple girl with an old trumpet taught him how to listen again. And that was the moment everything flipped.